Welcome back to Lore at Night, where rain gently falls and every story carries a shadow. I'm always curious to hear where in the world you're listening from, so comment that down below. Now get comfortable, and let's begin with the first story. In the crisp fall of 1976, a neighbor climbed over a chain-link fence to check on Helen Ramsey and found her body seated in a folding chair at the bottom of her own basement stairs, hands folded in her lap, head tilted slightly forward as if listening to something below. The scene felt wrong right away. Her legs straight out in front of her, shoes placed neatly next to the chair instead of on her feet. A single basement window left cracked open, just enough for someone to slip through. Helen Ramsey, 41, lived alone in a modest ranch house in the West Highlands neighborhood, a place where families filled the days with school runs and backyard barbecues, while the city grew around the edges of its old neighborhoods. She worked as a librarian at the local branch, known for recommending Western novels to regulars, and spent evenings in her basement organizing old records and fixing small appliances for neighbors. Her friend called the police after 2 days of unanswered phone calls, worried about the flu going around that season. Officers arrived as the sun dipped low, noting no signs of a break-in at the front or back doors, just that basement window with its screen pushed aside and a faint smudge on the sill that looked like a glove print. Helen's body showed bruises on her neck from strangulation, but the chair and pose suggested someone had moved her after death to look like she passed out waiting for help. The medical examiner confirmed it later. Manual strangulation first, then the careful setup to mimic a quiet end alone in her hobby space. Homicide Detective Tom Keller picked up the case from the Denver PD's Major Crimes Unit, his desk already stacked with files from a busy year of burglaries, turning violent in the expanding suburbs. He took photos of the scene himself with a Polaroid camera, capturing the way her hands rested too perfectly, the shoes lined up like they belonged to a display. Keller started knocking on doors in the neighborhood, where people remembered Helen as friendly, but private, mentioning a handyman who had been around a few weeks earlier fixing a sump pump during heavy rains. Denver in the mid-1970s ran on paper reports and phone trees, with detectives like Keller driving unmarked cars to check leads while crime lab results took weeks. The autopsy pinned her time of death to late evening 3 nights before, stomach contents showing a simple dinner of soup and crackers, small cuts on her palms from a recent fall she mentioned at work. Toxicology came back clean except for over-the-counter painkillers, nothing to explain the lack of struggle marks. Keller dug into Helen's life through library co-workers and church friends. She had lived in the house since her divorce 5 years earlier, no kids, no close family nearby, her routine steady enough that her absence stood out quickly to those who knew her. Phone records showed calls to a hardware store about pump parts, and a neighbor recalled seeing a work van parked in her driveway around dusk a few days before she went quiet. The glove's smudge on the window led to a check of local hardware stores, where clerks remembered selling work gloves to repair guys servicing flooded basements that fall. Fibers from the glove matched cheap cotton ones sold in bulk, and a faint boot print on the basement floor came back similar to construction styles. Keller mapped the neighborhood, noting how the houses backed onto open lots perfect for parking a van out of sight from the street. Public notices in the Rocky Mountain News brought a few tips about unfamiliar trucks in the area, but nothing solid until a coworker mentioned Helen joking about a repairman who kept coming back unasked to check if the pump held. Keller pulled service records from local plumbing companies and found a name, Gary Wells, a part-time handyman who worked odd jobs in West Highlands, his van marked with a small repair logo spotted near Helen's house. Wells had been in the area for weeks, fixing sump pumps in older homes hit by rain, neighbors placing his van near Helen's and a few others. Keller looked at unsolved cases from the past year. 2 women in similar basements, posed in chairs with shoes off, strangled and left to look like heart attacks. One in Sunnyside, Ellen Carter, found after a missed book club meeting. Another in Berkeley, Marie Holt, discovered by a meter reader. Both had recent repair visits, basements with cracked windows. Keller followed Wells for a few days, watching him pull into driveways after dark, checking sump pumps without being asked, his flashlight sweeping basement levels through windows. Surveillance photos showed him lingering longer than needed, coming out with small tools or parts. A pawn shop tip placed him selling old radio parts from Helen's basement collection shortly after her death. Then came the third body in a Sloan's Lake basement. Same chair pose, shoes aside, window cracked. The victim, Ruth Parker, 39, had called Wells for a pump check days before. His van had fresh dirt matching the basement soil, glove fibers in the back, tying to the scene. What looked like lonely accidents turned into a pattern of basement stranglings across Denver's rainy fall. Detective Keller pulled the 3 basement cases together into one file, seeing how they lined up across West Highlands, Sunnyside, and Sloan's Lake. All older Denver neighborhoods where ranch houses had basements prone to flooding from fall rains. Each woman sat in a folding chair at the bottom of her stairs, hands folded, shoes off and lined up nearby, necks bruised from strangulation but posed to look like they just nodded off. Ruth Parker, the newest at 39, worked as a teller at a local bank and had hired Gary Wells a week earlier to check her sump pump after a heavy storm. Keller mapped Wells's jobs against the death dates, his repair van moving through the same cluster of suburbs where single women in their late 30s and early 40s lived alone in homes with those vulnerable basement windows. Gary Wells, 43, picked up handyman work through small ads in the phone book, fixing pumps and leaks in older places, while the city boomed with new construction nearby. Neighbors from all 3 scenes remembered his van, his offers to double-check work for free, his questions about who else lived in the house. Keller's team spread out through the rainy streets, talking to more neighbors and co-workers who put Wells at houses with similar setups in the weeks before each death. Pawn shop records showed him selling small electronics and tools that matched items from Helen Ramsey's basement and Ruth Parker's workbench. His cash deposits hit peaks right after the jobs, with no clear source beyond the repair work. Keller checked his record and found a few old trespassing tickets from the early 1970s. Cases dropped when homeowners did not press charges after he fixed things for free. The victims shared a lot, all divorced or widowed, working steady jobs like library or bank shifts that left evenings free for basement projects, no live-in family to notice right away. Autopsy showed the strangling happened fast from behind. Then the bodies moved and posed with no signs of long fights, suggesting surprise or something to calm them first. Toxicology picked up low levels of over-the-counter sedatives in 2 cases, the kind sold at any drugstore, enough to slow reactions but not knock them out. Keller brought in detectives from the nearby precincts, meeting in a back room at headquarters where they laid out photos side by side. The glove fibers from all scenes matched the cheap cotton sold everywhere, but boot prints came closer to Wells' work shoes from a traffic ticket photo. They started watching him close, unmarked cars following his van from job sites to bars on Federal Boulevard, noting how he circled back to past houses after dark, shining a flashlight through basement windows like he was checking his work. Lab work took time in 1976, but early results showed dirt from Ruth Parker's basement matching samples vacuumed from Wells's van floor mats. Hair caught in the glove print typed to a common profile, but ruled out the victims. Keller went back to the scenes, having techs lift more dust from stair rails and chair legs, finding fibers from work pants worn by repair guys. Public tips came in after a short news story, women mentioning handymen who stayed too long or came back uninvited. A 4th case surfaced from Jefferson Park earlier that year, basement chair pose matching perfectly, window cracked, shoes aside. The victim, Laura Bennett, had a sump pump receipt with Wells's name. Keller added it to the file, the pattern now clear over 6 months across West Denver. Wells moved his base to a storage lot near Sloan's Lake after someone mentioned police questions, but surveillance stuck with him, catching him testing basement windows at night. Keller built a profile with help from a state behavioral expert. Wells fit the type of guy who used trusted jobs to get close, targeting women living alone whose deaths would not raise alarms fast. The posing made it look like natural causes, buying time to clean up and move on. Team members debated bait houses with fake sump pump problems, but risks to undercover people killed the idea. Instead, they fed tips through hardware stores where he bought gloves and tools. Doubters in the unit said it could be coincidence, with flooded basements common that fall and repair guys everywhere. Keller pointed to the exact same chair pose and shoe placement, details too specific for chance. Wells grew careful, parking his van farther from houses, but a gas station receipt placed him near Laura Bennett's place during her death window. The investigation tightened, every lead pulling closer to the handyman whose fixes hid something darker in Denver's quiet suburbs. Detective Keller got a warrant for Gary Wells's storage lot near Sloan's Lake after lab dirt matches from the van and boot print comparisons lined up too perfectly to ignore. The team moved in before dawn on a cold November morning, pulling back the tarp on his repair van to find a metal lockbox bolted inside under spare tires and sump pump parts. Inside sat women's jewelry from Helen Ramsey's basement dresser, a library card in Ruth Parker's name creased, like it had been carried in a pocket, and work gloves with basement dust still clinging to the seams, fibers matching all 4 seams. Lab techs worked fast once they had the items. The gloves tested positive for skin cells that ruled out the victims, but fit a male profile consistent with Wells's age and billed from his driver's license medical form. Jewelry scratches aligned with pliers found in his toolbox, and the library card had a faint blood trace typing to Helen's group from a small cut on her hand. Keller laid out the evidence photos next to crime scene shots, building a clear chain showing how Wells took trophies from each job before posing the bodies. Wells showed up as they finished the search, his work coat dusted with fresh dirt from an overnight call. He went into cuffs quietly, eyes scanning the lot like he calculated his next move. At the station, booking photos showed scarred knuckles matching the neck bruises, and his hands measured right for the grip marks. Keller watched the holding cell feed, noting how Wells paced the same way neighbors described him circling houses after dark. The task force grew to 10 detectives, pooling tips from across West Denver as winter set in. They rechecked all scenes with better lights and vacuums, pulling carpet fibers from stairwells that matched Wells's van mats and pants from a prior ticket. Neighbors and co-workers filled in more details, Wells asking about family during pump fixes, coming back unasked at night to test the seal, selling pawned items that matched victim belongings. Gas station video placed his van near every death, timestamps leaving no room for alibis. A 5th case came up from Edgewater that summer, same basement chair and shoes, window smudged with glove prints. The victim, Diane Walsh, had Wells's repair receipt. Keller made it official number 5, the pattern stretching a year through flooded suburbs. News stories brought calls from women who chased off handymen matching his description, their accounts matching the flashlight sweeps caught on surveillance. Keller's background check painted Wells as a drifter who settled in Denver after odd jobs in Wyoming, with complaints from landlords about lingering in basements too long. Former clients remembered him getting upset over small payments, tailing them home after jobs. A police psychologist called him a control type, using repair trust to target women whose deaths looked natural in quiet neighborhoods. Store receipts showed Wells buying gloves and sedatives right before each case, patterns too tight for luck. Lake divers found a bag of basement tools with fibers linking back to Marie Holt's scene. The team skipped fake repair traps due to safety issues, but spread word through hardware shops that made Wells jumpy, switching lots twice. Tips poured in about his late-night window checks. Lineups putting his face in front of witnesses who nodded yes. Some detectives still wondered if it all connected perfectly, but the glove matches and trophies silenced most. Keller tracked Wells's cash against rain weeks, spikes tying straight to victim jobs with no other explanation. In lockup, Wells tried carving a small tool from a bed frame, caught early. Warrants hit his apartment next, turning up more cards and jewelry, the case now rock solid. Snow started falling as Keller walked Helen's basement one last time, now secured with window bars from community funds. The pattern stood clear, a handyman who turned flooded fixes into strangling grounds, every lead closing the circle around him in Denver's snowy grip. Prosecutors charged Gary Wells with the 5 confirmed basement murders stretching from West Highlands to Edgewater, the evidence too strong to fight. Glove fibers, jewelry trophies, and van dirt tying him directly to every scene, with timelines fixing his repair van outside each house during the exact death windows. Life sentences without parole came down fast for all counts, the judge noting how Wells preyed on women living alone whose posed deaths delayed any real alarm in Denver's quiet suburbs. Appeals failed within a couple years, and he spent his days in a Cannon City cell until heart issues took him in 2001, noted only in prison records. Further checks after charges linked him to 2 more likely cases from 1975, but time limits kept those off the books, closing the count at 7 over 18 months through West Denver's rainy seasons. The case changed how police handled handyman calls, requiring double checks on repair IDs, basement window audits in flood-prone areas, and shared tip lines across precincts before computers made it easier. Keller moved up to lead a suburbs task force, his basement maps used in training to spot staging tricks that hid stranglings as accidents. Neighborhoods added window bars and motion lights with city grants. Sump pump companies started vetting workers through police lists. Helen's library branch put up a small plaque with her name and others, families holding quiet memorials that pushed for women's safety checks in older homes. The victims got their stories told beyond short news clips, a reminder of the handyman who turned trusted fixes into traps. Keller retired in the early 1990s, keeping a framed photo of Helen's basement set up on his wall, the chair pose etched in memory as the clue that broke it all. Denver kept growing, new subdivisions swallowing old lots, but the lesson stuck. Patterns hid in plain sight until someone connected the chairs and shoes. Police decades later still referenced the case when basement calls came in during storms, making sure the next repair guy faced questions before ladders went down. Now, let's get into the next story. The scene carried an unnatural stillness that unsettled him before he registered the full extent of what lay before him, her head tilted at an angle that no living person could sustain. Blood pooled beneath a chair in a pattern that suggested deliberate placement rather than random spill. The body appeared staged with care, her arms folded loosely across her lap, legs extended straight, a half-empty glass of iced tea positioned within. Easy reach on the counter nearby. In the sweltering heat of a 1987 Phoenix summer, when monsoon storms briefly broke the relentless sun only to leave streets steaming and air conditioners straining, a maintenance worker unlocked apartment 14B at the Sunset Palms complex and found Evelyn Carver propped against her kitchen counter as if she had paused mid-morning routine. The worker retreated immediately, radioed for assistance, and secured the door, preserving a scene that would puzzle investigators from the outset. Phoenix in the late 1980s operated as a sprawling grid of suburbs and strip malls. where rapid growth strained police resources, and older apartment complexes like Sunset Palms housed a mix of retirees, young families, and transients, drawn by cheap rents and proximity to factories along the Salt River Valley. She wore a light cotton dress suited to the desert heat, its hem smoothed down as if someone had adjusted it after the violence occurred, and her sandals rested neatly beside her feet, removed with intention rather than kicked aside in struggle. Evelyn Carver, aged 42, had lived there for just over a year, her name listed on a basic lease paid month to month in cash, with no close relatives noted in any records. Neighbors described her as polite but distant, someone who kept curtains drawn and rarely entertained guests. Her evenings spent tending a small balcony garden of cacti and succulents that thrived despite neglect. The initial responding officers treated the discovery as a potential homicide, but noted the absence of forced entry, no signs of ransacking, and personal items like a purse and wallet left untouched on the living room table. The kitchen bore the only disturbance, a single overturned chair and smears on the linoleum that forensic teams would later trace to specific shoe treads mismatched with Evelyn's footwear. Blood spatter analysis indicated multiple blows from a blunt object, likely the heavy glass ashtray found wiped clean and returned to a shelf in the living room, its base carrying faint microscopic traces that would require lab confirmation. Homicide Detective Maria Salazar took lead on the case, her notebook filling quickly with details from the scene walkthrough. In an era before widespread digital databases, she relied on handwritten logs, Polaroid backups of 35mm film photos, and phone trees to circulate Evelyn's description to hospitals, shelters, and neighboring divisions. The autopsy confirmed death by repeated cranial trauma, with strangulation marks overlaid as a finishing method, the combination pointing to a personal encounter rather than random intrusion. Toxicology revealed minimal alcohol, no illicit drugs, and stomach contents consistent with a light breakfast eaten hours earlier, narrowing her final hours to the previous evening when neighbors recalled hearing faint thumps but dismissed them as normal household noise. Salazar canvassed the complex thoroughly, mapping resident routines against Evelyn's known schedule. Sunset Palms set off a busy arterial road, its parking lot overlooked by a mix of single-family homes and vacant lots, awaiting the next wave of tract development, a layout that offered multiple access points without heavy surveillance. Tenants reported a revolving door of short-term residents, utility workers, and delivery drivers, any of whom could have slipped inside during the day's heat when doors stood propped open for airflow. Evelyn's ground floor unit faced a shared breezeway, its lock simple enough to pick or bump, with tools common in the maintenance trade. Background checks painted Evelyn as a woman who had relocated from a small Arizona town 3 years prior, working irregular shifts as a cashier at a nearby convenience store and supplementing income with odd jobs sewing alterations for neighbors. Her phone records showed sparse calls, mostly to a sister in Tucson who had not heard from her in months, and bank statements reflected steady but modest withdrawals, no large deposits or suspicious patterns. Salazar sensed early that Evelyn represented the kind of quiet life that evaded easy scrutiny, her absence unlikely to trigger immediate alarm until rent went unpaid. The ashtray emerged as the linchpin object, its positioning too precise for accident. Lab results lifted partial prints belonging to neither Evelyn nor the maintenance worker, alongside fibers from a synthetic carpet not present in her apartment. Salazar requested access to all complex maintenance logs, revealing a pattern of service calls handled by external contractors during peak summer breakdowns, their names logged inconsistently on faded carbon copies. One entry stood out, a repair visit to 14B 2 weeks earlier for a faulty window AC unit, signed by a subcontractor named Harlan Voss, whose company had folded amid complaints of shoddy work. As days turned to weeks, the case settled into routine follow-up. Salazar drove the parched streets of South Phoenix, interviewing former co-workers who described Evelyn as reliable yet withdrawn, prone to long shifts without complaint. Store surveillance tapes from her final shift showed her closing alone at 10 p.m., waving to a passing security patrol before walking home under sodium vapor lights that cast long shadows across empty sidewalks. No vehicle lingered in footage, no figure trailed her visible path. Public appeals yielded little beyond vague tips about unfamiliar vans parked overnight near the complex. The local paper ran a brief item buried in Metro News, prompting a single call from a woman who claimed to have seen Evelyn arguing with a man matching no known description outside a laundromat days before. Salazar filed it alongside dozens of others, building a web of maybes that strained the limits of manpower allocated to a single unexplained death. Phoenix homicide rates that summer hovered at levels manageable for a growing department, yet each unsolved file carried internal pressure to resolve quickly. Salazar reviewed similar cases from the past 2 years. Women found in staged poses within their homes, blunt trauma paired with strangulation, always in low-income complexes where transients blurred witness reliability. One from a Mesa apartment complex 6 months prior shared the ashtray motif, the object cleaned and replaced, body arranged with eerie calm. Pathologists noted overlapping wound patterns, enough to flag for comparison but short of declaring linkage. Salazar pulled the Mesa file, noting the victim, Lila Grant, had hosted a repairman for plumbing issues shortly before her death. Contractors overlapped slightly with Sunset Palms vendors, though Voss appeared only in Evelyn's records. Driving to the address listed for him led to a rented trailer in a mobile home park east of Tempe, its yard cluttered with HVAC parts and rusted tools under relentless sun. A neighbor confirmed Voss worked odd jobs but kept to himself, his truck often absent during night hours. The detective requested his full service history, uncovering gaps where jobs ended abruptly amid client complaints about lingering presence post-repair. No priors surfaced in Arizona records, but a juvenile arrest in California for burglary hinted at early boundary testing. Salazar placed him under loose surveillance, watching as he serviced units in similar complexes, always professional on surface but prone to extended chats with female tenants. Months passed without new violence fitting the pattern, lulling the investigation into maintenance mode. Then, in early autumn, a call came from a Chandler duplex where tenant Sandra Klein lay arranged on her living room floor. Blows from a lamp base followed by strangulation, the fixture wiped and reset on an end table. Salazar arrived to find the same smooth clothing, folded arms, and removed shoes, the fibers from Evelyn's scene matching those vacuumed from Sandra's carpet. Repair logs confirmed Voss on site days earlier for electrical work. The pattern solidified, transforming isolated tragedies into a deliberate series threading through Phoenix's expanding sprawl. With the Chandler duplex confirming a third victim in the pattern, Detective Salazar consolidated the cases into a single investigative file that spanned multiple jurisdictions within the Phoenix metropolitan area. Each scene shared the meticulous staging, the blunt object selected from the victim's own home and returned to its place after cleaning, and the absence of theft or sexual assault that might have suggested a more chaotic offender. Sandra Klein, 38, had lived alone in the duplex for 6 months, her job as a night clerk at a Tempe motel placing her on a schedule that left evenings empty and doors unlocked during brief absences. Salazar mapped the locations on a large paper grid pinned to her office wall, noting how Sunset Palms, the Mesa complex, and the Chandler duplex formed a loose triangle across expanding suburbs where new tract housing met older rental properties. The killer chose ground floor or easily accessible units in complexes with high turnover, where maintenance calls provided legitimate entry, and residents rarely questioned unfamiliar faces in coveralls. Harlan Voss appeared in service logs for 2 of the 3 sites. His subcontracting work concentrated in South and East Phoenix during the precise months when the killings occurred. The detective expanded her review to include unreported disturbances and complaints logged at apartment management offices over the previous 3 years. Patterns emerged in tenant feedback about a repairman who overstepped boundaries, lingering after jobs to ask personal questions or offer unsolicited help with additional fixes. One woman from a Scottsdale complex described a man matching Voss's build and vehicle returning unannounced after hours, claiming to check a prior repair, though she had turned him away at the door. Her account, dismissed at the time as overcaution, aligned with Salazar's growing profile of an offender who tested access before escalating. Victimology provided another thread. Evelyn Carver, Lila Grant, and Sandra Klein shared profiles as single women in their late 30s and early 40s, employed in low-wage service roles that isolated them during off hours. None had children or live-in partners. Their social circles consisted of co-workers and distant family, who checked in infrequently. Autopsies revealed no defensive wounds beyond initial bruises, suggesting the attacks began with surprise, from behind, or during a moment of lowered guard, followed by overwhelming force that limited prolonged struggle. Toxicology consistently showed light alcohol use, enough to dull reflexes but not incapacitate fully. Salazar coordinated with neighboring departments in Mesa and Chandler, pooling resources for a joint task force that met weekly in a windowless conference room at Phoenix PD headquarters. The group pored over repair manifests, cross-referencing Voss's known jobs against vacancy rates and tenant demographics at each complex. His employment history revealed spells of unemployment bridged by cash gigs, periods when his truck had been spotted parked overnight near low-rent areas according to DMV logs and parking citations. Neighbors at his trailer park recalled him hosting occasional gatherings with other tradesmen, conversations turning to complaints about difficult clients, always women who lived alone. Surveillance intensified without alerting Voss. Unmarked cars tracked his maroon Ford pickup from job sites to bars along Apache Junction, where he drank alone or with rotating acquaintances, nursing beers until closing. Observers noted his habit of circling complexes after dark, slowing near buildings with visible women's laundry on balconies or lights burning late in single-occupied units. The behavior fit an opportunistic predator who blended into the service economy, using tools and uniforms as camouflage while scouting future opportunities. Forensic advances of the era offered limited breakthroughs. Partial prints from the ashtray in Evelyn's apartment excluded Voss directly, but matched a generic glove-type common in HVAC work. Fibers linked across scenes traced to a specific brand of shop rag sold at bulk suppliers frequented by contractors. Hair samples, analyzed via emerging mitochondrial DNA methods, excluded immediate family matches, but narrowed to Caucasian males in their 40s with no recent barber cuts. Blood spatter reconstructions confirmed the killer stood over 5'10", right-handed, with controlled strength that avoided excessive mess. Salazar revisited the original scenes with fresh eyes, directing technicians to re-vacuum upholstery and baseboards overlooked in initial sweeps. A single polyester thread from Voss's truck upholstery appeared in Sandra Klein's sofa cushions, a microscopic link that bolstered the circumstantial web. The task force debated public warnings, weighing panic against protection. They opted for targeted alerts to women's shelters and property managers, describing a person of interest without releasing his name or image, urging residents to verify service credentials and report suspicious follow-ups. As autumn deepened, Voss's routines shifted subtly, Job leads dried up amid seasonal slowdowns, pushing him toward informal labor pools at hardware stores and day-hire lots. Surveillance captured him, arguing with the dispatcher over unpaid invoices, his gestures sharp and contained. The task force considered bait operations, staging maintenance calls in high-risk complexes with undercover female officers posing as tenants, but logistical hurdles and legal thresholds delayed implementation. Instead, they tightened the net through financial records, tracing cash deposits that coincided with repair payouts and unexplained windfalls. Public response remained muted, the story confined to brief television segments and back-page articles that framed the deaths as connected but unsolved. Families of the victims attended a joint vigil outside Phoenix City Hall, holding faded photographs under Klieg lights, their presence underscoring the human cost without generating actionable tips. Salazar fielded calls from distant relatives who recalled the women mentioning odd encounters with repairmen, details too vague for immediate pursuit but added to the offender profile. Internal skepticism surfaced within the task force. Some argued the similarities stemmed from common burglary gone wrong scenarios in transient housing, dismissing Voss as one face among many contractors. Salazar countered with the staging element, the ritualistic return of weapons to original spots, and arrangement of bodies in lifelike poses that suggested psychological compulsion beyond profit. Behavioral analysts from the State Bureau consulted on the case, describing a power assurance killer who derived satisfaction from control over vulnerable targets, revisiting sites mentally or physically to relive the acts. Voss relocated abruptly to a cheaper trailer park near the Superstition Mountains, a move tracked via utility hookups. Surveillance adjusted, following him into rougher terrain where his truck blended with off-road enthusiasts and seasonal workers. The detective sensed escalation risk as inactivity bred frustration, predicting a fourth incident unless intervention occurred. She pushed for a search warrant based on accumulated surveillance logs, fiber matches, and tenant complaints, but judges required stronger ties to overcome the no-priors barrier. The break arrived indirectly through a routine traffic stop. Voss's truck, pulled over for a taillight violation east of Mesa, yielded a search after the officer detected marijuana odor. Inside a toolbox, officers found a bundle of women's jewelry, including a necklace matching one photographed in Lila Grant's apartment inventory. The discovery prompted an immediate hold, and Salazar arrived within hours to oversee transfer to homicide holding. The task force now possessed tangible evidence linking Voss to at least one scene, shifting the investigation from pattern building to direct confrontation. Preliminary interviews unfolded in stark interrogation rooms, Voss offering clipped denials about the necklace's origin, claiming it as a flea market find. Salazar reviewed tapes of his reactions, noting micro-expressions of calculation rather than panic. Lab confirmation on the jewelry elevated charges, while searches of his new trailer uncovered shop rags stained with untested blood and a notebook with circled apartment listings from victim complexes. The case, once a fragile chain of inferences, gained unbreakable links, propelling Voss toward formal indictment as Phoenix's shadows prepared to yield their secrets. The jewelry discovery accelerated the investigation into overdrive as Detective Salazar's task force executed a full search of Harlan Voss's new trailer under the authority granted by the traffic stop evidence. The cluttered interior revealed a life suspended in disarray, with toolboxes overflowing onto particle board shelves and walls papered in faded calendars marking job sites across Phoenix's sprawling suburbs. Amid the chaos, technicians uncovered a locked metal box wedged beneath the floorboards, its contents amplifying the necklace's implications. A collection of small personal effects, including a monogrammed keychain from Evelyn Carver's balcony door, a lipstick tube matching Sandra Klein's Vanity brand, and several Polaroid snapshots of apartment interiors taken from angles suggesting unauthorized entry. Forensic processing prioritized the box's items, with lab technicians employing emerging 1980s techniques like phase contrast microscopy to detect trace biological material invisible to earlier sweeps. Saliva residues on the keychain yielded a partial DNA profile excluding Voss definitively, but aligning with male epithelial cells from Evelyn's kitchen scene, a match probabilistic yet damning in context. Fibers from the snapshots, backing paper, traced to carpet samples vacuumed from Lila Grant's unit, while the lipstick bore microscopic scratches consistent with teeth marks overlaid during strangulation pressure. Each finding wove tighter into the circumstantial fabric, transforming Voss from peripheral figure to central suspect. Salazar pored over Voss's movements during holding, where video feeds captured his pacing and intermittent glances at the two-way mirror, behaviors analysts interpreted as rehearsed containment rather than genuine bewilderment. His employment chronology now faced exhaustive scrutiny, with former employers subpoenaed to produce payroll stubs and time cards revealing patterns of early departures and unlogged overtime spent at client properties. Neighbors from multiple trailer parks recalled his late-night tool tinkering and solitary drives toward city lights, habits that placed him within blocks of each crime scene during critical windows reconstructed from witness timelines and gas station receipts. The task force expanded victim linkage review, dispatching teams to re-examine 5 additional unsolved deaths of women in similar housing over the prior 4 years. 2 cases elevated to probable connections. A 1985 Glendale townhouse where victim Nora Hale had been found posed on her sofa with a fireplace poker reset beside her, and a 1983 Tempe efficiency where Diane Morrow lay arranged in her bathtub, her own curling iron used and replaced after the attack. Repair records tied Voss tangentially to both buildings through affiliated subcontractors, his signature absent but his truck description echoed in parking lot security stills developed from archived film. Public information strategy evolved cautiously amid mounting evidence. Press releases described a person of interest in maintenance attire without naming Voss, prompting tips from women across the valley who recalled prolonged service visits marked by probing questions about living arrangements and daily routines. A composite sketch circulated through the Arizona Republic and local television affiliates, generating calls that placed Voss lingering near motels and laundromats frequented by the victim types. Salazar filtered these against DMV records, prioritizing those overlapping his known haunts. Voss's background deepened the profile during interviews with distant acquaintances. Born in rural California, he had drifted into Arizona's construction boom after a string of failed apprenticeships marred by complaints of inappropriate conduct toward female supervisors. A former landlady described evictions prompted by tenant harassment claims always resolved short of charges through cash settlements. Psychological evaluations from a mandatory 1970s job screening flagged antisocial traits and fixation on control, details unearthed from dusty personnel folders that painted him as a man whose public affability masked escalating boundary violations. Surveillance footage from a South Phoenix hardware store captured Voss purchasing heavy-duty shop rags and cleaning solvents in quantities exceeding typical job needs, timed weeks before Sandra Klein's death. Cross-referencing purchase logs against complex inventories revealed similar buys preceding the other killings, establishing premeditation through material acquisition. The task force mapped his truck's odometer estimates against distances to scenes, accounting for fuel ups documented on credit slips that left no alibi gaps during attack windows. Internal debates centered on potential escalation prevention. With Voss in custody, the city exhaled slightly, yet Salazar advocated continued canvassing for unreported assaults, suspecting his career included non-fatal intrusions. Outreach to women's groups distributed flyers detailing offender traits and safety protocols, emphasizing door chains, peepholes, and credential verification in an era when home security meant basic deadbolts rather than integrated alarms. Challenges persisted in building an airtight case. Voss offered no admissions, his statements through counsel dismissing the box's contents as scavenged junk from job trash bins. Defense anticipated arguing coincidence in a city teeming with itinerant repairmen, leveraging the era's forensic limitations, where partial matches fell short of courtroom absolutes. Salazar countered by compiling a visual timeline exhibit, layering crime scene photos atop Voss's service maps to illustrate inescapable geographic and temporal convergence. As winter rains softened Phoenix's dust, the prosecution filed charges on the 3 core murders, with enhancements for the linked cases pending further analysis. Bail hearings highlighted the flight risk posed by his transient history, resulting in pre-trial detention. Salazar visited the original scenes one final time, walking Evelyn Carver's breezeway under clearing skies, noting how changed landscaping and new tenants had overwritten physical traces, while the investigative record preserved their stories intact. The probe uncovered a near-miss 4th victim, a waitress who had chased off an intruder during a feigned follow-up repair at her Mesa bungalow weeks after Lila Grant's death. Her description of the man's build, tools, and retreating truck matched surveillance stills, her reluctance to report earlier now contextualized as survival instinct. This account extended Voss's pattern backward, suggesting years of probing before lethal commitment. Task force cohesion frayed under workload strain, yet shared momentum-sustained effort. Salazar mentored younger detectives on pattern recognition, emphasizing how staging behaviors differentiated ritualistic offenders from opportunistic ones. Budget constraints limited overtime, but community donations funded victim family support, ensuring memorials proceeded amid proceedings. By early 1988, evidence assembly neared completion, with expert affidavits affirming injury consistencies across autopsies and fiber analysts certifying cross-scene material transfers. Voss's isolation in county jail contrasted his former freedom traversing sun-baked streets, the net drawn from scattered deaths into unified accountability. Salazar prepared for trial, aware that conviction would affirm not just justice for the named victims, but vigilance against shadows lurking in everyday service calls. The trial of Harlan Voss unfolded in a Maricopa County courtroom during the dry spring of 1988, when Phoenix courthouses hummed with air conditioners battling heat that seeped through concrete walls and the weight of accumulated cases. Prosecutors presented a narrative built on layers of physical evidence, witness recollections, and behavioral patterns that spanned years across the valley's rental landscapes. The locked metal box from Voss's trailer served as exhibit cornerstone, its contents laid out under fluorescent lights for jury scrutiny, each item tied methodically to specific victims through forensic linkages and provenances that resisted dismissal as random accumulation. Salazar testified early, her delivery measured as she walked jurors through timelines overlaid on city maps, red pins marking service calls against black markers for body discoveries. She detailed how Voss's maroon Ford pickup had appeared in grainy security stills from complex gates, time-stamped within hours of each attack, corroborated by gas receipts and co-worker accounts placing him unaccounted for during critical windows. Fiber analysts followed, explaining microscopic transfers from truck upholstery to victim clothing, shop rags to scene residues, establishing material continuity that transcended coincidence in a city of transient labor. Pathologists aligned autopsies side by side, projecting slides that highlighted identical blunt force trajectories and ligature pressures consistent with male hands of Voss's size and grip strength. The staging ritual emerged vividly through crime scene reconstructions, scale models showing how bodies had been arranged post-mortem, with skirts smoothed, shoes aligned, and weapons reset, behaviors experts classified as signature markers of a control-oriented offender rather than burglary aftermath. Behavioral consultants from the State Forensic Unit described Voss's profile as power assurance predatory, thriving on vulnerability in isolated domestic spaces accessed via trusted roles. Defense counsel countered with character witnesses from construction firms, portraying Voss as reliable tradesmen felled by circumstantial pylons in a litigious era. They challenged partial DNA and fiber probabilities, arguing lab margins for error exceeded certainty thresholds available in 1980s technology. Tenant complaints surfaced as selective recollections from litigious renters, while the metal box items got framed as harmless souvenirs from cleanup jobs at evictions. Yet cross-examination eroded these claims, with Salazar redirecting on geographic impossibilities that placed Voss at multiple scenes absent alternative explanations. Victim families filled gallery rows, their presence silent testament amid proceedings that dissected private lives for public record. Evelyn Carver's sister identified the monogrammed keychain under oath, recalling its gift during a rare visit, her voice steady through tears held back for decorum. Sandra Klein's co-workers corroborated her routines, underscoring how Maintenance Trust had enabled entry. The near-miss waitress delivered compelling testimony on Voss's attempted revisit, her detailed recall of his feigned credentials and retreating truck-matching prosecution composites circulated months prior. Deliberations stretched 2 days, jurors weighing a case where no single smoking gun overshadowed the collective force of pattern evidence. Voss maintained composure throughout, his gaze fixed forward, betraying no reaction as verdicts read guilty on 3 counts of first-degree murder, with aggravating factors for premeditation and multiple victims. Sentencing phase reinforced severity, judges citing the deliberate selection of defenseless women whose deaths exploited systemic gaps in tenant protections and service vetting. Post-conviction reviews linked Voss to the 2 additional probable cases, Nora Hale and Diane Morrow, though evidentiary hurdles prevented reopened charges. Prosecutors pursued enhancements tying his juvenile record to adult patterns, resulting in life without parole at Arizona State Prison Complex in Florence, where desert isolation mirrored the margins he once prowled. Appeals dragged through early 1990s, uniformly denied as mountains of exhibits withstood scrutiny. For Phoenix law enforcement, the Voss case reshaped protocols in rental-heavy suburbs. Departments mandated dual verification for maintenance entries, peephole installations in city-subsidized housing, and cross-jurisdictional databases for contractor complaints predating digital integration. Salazar rose through ranks, her investigation textbook for training seminars on serial offender recognition, emphasizing staging cues and victimology overlaps often missed in resource-strapped units. The Sunset Palms complex underwent renovation post-trial. Breezeways secured with gates, ground floor windows fitted with break-resistant film, tenants rotating as sprawl pushed boundaries outward. Families held annual memorials, blending victim names with advocacy for women's safety networks, their efforts seeding nonprofit patrols and hotlines that endured into the 1990s. Evelyn, Lila, Sandra, and shadows of others found recognition beyond case files, their stories cautioning against unseen threats in familiar spaces. Salazar retired in the late 1990s, her office wall map preserved as personal keepsake, pins dulled but positions fixed. She reflected on how Phoenix's boom had amplified opportunities for predators blending into growth machinery, yet collective vigilance closed loops left open by transients. Voss died in custody during early 2000s from untreated illness, his passing noted only in prison logs, unremarked by Valley residents who moved forward under brighter security lights. The series, once fragmented deaths in news briefs, coalesced into enduring case study of persistence yielding justice. Investigators encountering similar patterns decades later drew from its playbook, recognizing how everyday service roles masked lethal intent amid urban expansion. Victims, lives, pieced from fragments, affirmed resilience against erasure. Their convergence with Voss, a stark intersection of vulnerability and predation, resolved through methodical pursuit. The desert city continued reshaping itself, horizons shifting. But lessons etched in investigative stone ensured shadows received less quarter. Now, let's get into the next story. The scene carried a staged precision that chilled responding officers before full measurements began. Her arms crossed over a threadbare cardigan as if settled for rest, legs tucked beneath, with ankles neatly overlapped. Dust, undisturbed beyond the narrow path of her fall. The discovery occurred in a Corktown row house converted to 4 cramped units, its exterior scarred by years of vacancy and neglect since the last Chrysler layoffs. Rippled through the neighborhood. In the fading industrial heart of 1978 Detroit, where snow piled against chain-link fences surrounding abandoned auto plants and streetlights flickered unreliable through bitter nights, a neighbor pried open the boarded plywood over Margaret Hale's basement window and discovered her body slumped at the foot of sagging stairs, neck twisted at an impossible angle amid shattered glass from a single bare bulb overhead. The window board, nailed hastily months earlier after a break-in attempt, concealed the violence until wind howled it loose during a lake-effect blizzard, revealing what cold weather had preserved in grim detail. Officers secured the site amid swirling flurries, noting no signs of forced entry through the warped front door or rusted back gate, suggesting the killer entered via the same basement window used for exit, leveraging its vulnerability in a block where prowlers tested locks nightly. Margaret Hale, 39, rented the basement apartment for cash, her name scratched on a peeling mailbox amid others long faded, her presence noted by neighbors only through occasional glimpses of her silhouette in the weak glow of a table lamp late into evenings. Blood traces followed the stair treads upward in faint droplets, ending abruptly halfway, as if someone wiped methodically with a rag before dragging the body downward, positioning it with care to mimic an accidental tumble. The medical examiner later confirmed manual strangulation preceded the neck snap, paired with contusions from a fall staged to appear genuine, the combination evading initial assumptions of household mishap. Homicide detective Leroy Banks drew the case, his metal desk in the crowded 10th precinct, stacked with files from a city reeling under 1978's spike in unsolved killings amid economic collapse. Photographs captured the unnatural calm of the pose, arms folded defensively yet symmetrically, cardigan buttoned to the throat concealing ligature marks faint under winter-pale skin. Banks canvassed the block, where residents huddled indoors against sub-zero gusts, their accounts fragmented by distrust of police and routines blurred by unemployment lines and corner taverns. Detroit's homicide squad operated on shoestring budgets, typewriters clacking reports in triplicate, while Polaroids supplemented film, developing delayed by lab backlogs, forcing Banks to sketch stare angles himself on graph paper. Autopsy details filled his notebook. Time of death estimated late the previous evening, stomach contents of canned soup and bread from supper, minor bruising on wrists consistent with brief restraint before compliance or unconsciousness. Toxicology detected low barbiturate levels, prescribed remnants from a corner pharmacy, enough to slow reactions without full sedation. Background checks pieced Margaret's life from sparse records. Widowed 5 years after a mill accident claimed her husband, she worked days cleaning offices in the Renaissance Center, evenings mending clothes for neighbors who paid in trade or liquor. Her sister and Inkster identified her from circulated flyers, recalling recent mentions of a handyman lingering near the row house offering free gutter fixes amid foreclosed vacancies. Phone logs showed no calls that night, mail uncollected for days. Her absence blending into the neighborhood's rhythm of disappearances chalked up to flight or worse. Banks traced the window board to a salvage yard off Michigan Avenue, where scraps from boarded factories supplied cheap security for Corktown landlords. Fibers on the nails matched burlap sacking common in auto salvage, microscopic slivers embedded in Margaret's cardigan, suggesting close contact during removal or replacement. He mapped access routes, noting alleys paralleling the block, where junked cars provided cover for vehicles slipping unseen between shifts at nearby Fisher Body Plant Number 21. Public notices yielded thin results. The Detroit Free Press running a paragraph amid union strikes and arson statistics, prompting anonymous tips about unfamiliar men scavenging copper wiring from empty houses. Banks interviewed tenants above Margaret, piecing routines. Her landlady upstairs heard creaks around midnight, but attributed them to settling foundations, a pattern repeated in vague recollections from across the street. The handyman mention surfaced repeatedly, descriptions coalescing around a stocky figure in oil-stained coveralls driving a battered panel van plastered with salvage yard decals. Review of similar cases from 1976 to 1978 revealed echoes. 2 women in Brightmoor found at basement stairs with necks broken posed as falls, both recent widows in declining blocks. Ruth Keller in 1977 lay folded at her landing, arms crossed, bruises hidden under housecoat. Elsie Pratt in 1976 slumped similarly, ligature marks overlaid on stair trauma. Banks pulled files, noting overlapping witness sightings of a van near each site. The staging dismissed initially as post-mortem settling in cold conditions. The salvage yard led to Victor Klein, a scrapper who moonlighted fixing roofs and gutters for cash, his yard cluttered with fenders from rusted Impalas and stacks of window plywood awaiting resale. Neighbors placed his van parked overnight blocks from Margaret's row house weeks prior, his visits extending beyond quoted jobs to chats through screen doors. Klein's logbook showed entries for all 3 addresses, payments scratched in pencil beside vague notes on loose boards. Banks shadowed Klein's routines, watching him prowl Corktown after dark, hammering loose plywood tighter on foreclosed homes, his flashlight beam lingering on basement windows where lights burned solitary. Surveillance captured him entering empty units uninvited, emerging with wiring or pipes, behaviors blurring legitimate salvage into trespass. A tip from a pawn shop identified Klein fencing copper from recent jobs, his cash flow peaking oddly around the death dates. As winter gripped tighter, a 4th body appeared in Delray, basement pose identical, ligature over broken neck, van tracks fresh in snow beside the alley. The victim, Clara Voss, cleaned at a shuttered steel mill, her handyman hired days earlier for window boards. Klein's yard held plywood scraps matching fibers from all scenes, his van interior yielding burlap scraps, and a pry bar with trace skin cells under nails. The pattern locked, transforming quiet falls into deliberate strangulations threading Detroit's hollowed core. Detective Banks consolidated the 4 basement cases into a master file that strained the precinct's metal cabinets, each victim's photograph pinned to a corkboard alongside maps of Corktown, Brightmoor, and Delray, where abandoned factories loomed like skeletal sentinels over blocks of fraying row houses. The staging uniformity stood stark. Necks snapped post-strangulation, bodies dragged to stair bases and arranged with arms crossed, clothing straightened, window boards replaced to delay discovery amid Detroit's brutal 1978 winter. Clara Voss, the latest at 41, had lived alone in a Delray flat shuttered externally since a mill closure. Her handyman hired cash on the barrel for plywood reinforcements against looters. Banks mapped Klein's salvage yard operations against death timelines, noting his panel van's routes, hugging industrial corridors where police patrols thinned after dusk shifts. Victor Klein, 45, scraped by hauling scrap from foreclosed properties, his logbook entries clustering around victim addresses with payments logged days before each killing. Neighbors across scenes recalled his lingering presence, flashlight probing basement windows under guise of board checks, conversations stretching as he noted solitary habits through half-open doors. His yard held plywood stacks matching nail fibers from Margaret Hale's cardigan, pry-bar traces aligning with contusions on all necks. The squad expanded canvases through snowdrifts, knocking on doors where families doubled up in half-empty buildings, their distrust yielding fragments. Klein arguing with a Brightmoor landlady over unpaid gutter work, his van idling midnight hours near Ruth Keller's block. Pawnshop ledgers confirmed copper sales spiking post-deaths, cash deposits undocumented beyond bar tabs at corner dives. Banks reviewed Klein's priors, minor trespasses and disorderly conducts from 1970s, scavenging busts, always released for lack of priors amid court backlogs swollen by arson waves. Victim profiles coalesced around widowed cleaners in their late 30s to early 40s, shifts ending late at Renaissance Center towers or mills, evenings alone in basements vulnerable through unboarded gaps. Autopsies revealed consistent ligature widths from calloused hands, barbiturate traces matching Margaret's pharmacy but absent Clara's, suggesting improvised sedation via stolen pills. No sexual assault marked the crimes, only control through staging falls that mimicked accidents in decaying structures, delaying scrutiny in a city numb to isolated tragedies. Banks coordinated with precincts in the affected zones, pooling typewritten reports in a smoke-filled briefing room where coffee burned on hot plates. They shadowed Klein's van from yard to taverns, logging detours past rooming houses where single women rented basement units. Surveillance Polaroids captured him prying boards on vacant properties after hours, emerging with wiring, his build matching composite sketches from tips. A tail followed him to a deserted Fisher body lot where he sorted scrap under headlamps, behaviors hinting at rehearsals for entry points. Forensic labs strained under caseloads processed vacuum tubes and wet chemistry, yet partial lifts from pry-bar yielded skin flakes excluding victims, but aligning male profiles via early serology. Burlap fibers threaded all scenes to Klein's sacking stacks, microscopic paint chips from his van interior matching Delray stair railings. Banks revisited scenes, directing re-examinations of dust layers showing drag paths inconsistent with falls, footprints smudged but sized to Klein's work boots documented in a 1975 trespass photo. Public appeals ran in free press want ads amid layoff headlines, generating calls placing Klein's van near two more potential sites. A 1975 Hamtramck basement death ruled accidental, victim posed identically, boards loose pre-discovery. The case, Ellen Pratt, elevated to review, her handyman logs listing Klein under alias. Banks pulled microfiche, noting ligature overlaps, transforming 5 quiet files into serial outline threading Detroit's rusting veins. Klein shifted yards after a tipster visit, relocating to a larger lot off Livernois amid rumors of police interest. Surveillance adjusted, capturing him hiring day laborers for heavy lifts, conversations turning to easy marks in empty buildings. Banks sought warrants on accumulated traces, judges wary of circumstantial webs without confessions, requiring affidavits stacking fiber reports atop timelines. A break came via utility worker, spotting Klein's van dumping burlap-wrapped refuse near Rouge River, divers recovering pill bottles matching Margaret's prescription. Task force debates weighed bait operations in boarded basements, rejected for resident risks in volatile neighborhoods. Instead, they fed tips through union halls, where Klein recruited, planting doubts about his reliability. Tips surged from ex-workers describing his rants against ungrateful widows over unpaid scraps, patterns of following female clients home. Banks mapped his cash flow against mill closure dates, peaks aligning with victim payments logged pre-killings. Internal skepticism challenged linkages, some detectives arguing economic desperation mimicked patterns in desperate times. Banks countered with staging ritual, necks snapped for finality post-strangle, poses defying gravity in stair falls. Behavioral consults from state psych wards labeled power control offender exploiting trusted fixer role amid urban decay, as thaw melted snow revealing overlooked tire ruts matching Klein's van treads, evidence mounted toward confrontation. Klein's routines escalated subtly, vans circling active rooming houses nightly, flashlight testing boards. Surveillance logged a near attempt at a Pole Town flat, tenant spotting shadow retreating after partial pry. The description locked composites, propelling warrant approvals. Banks prepared entry teams, sensing Klein sensed the net, his scrap piles burning late as if erasing traces. The city slumbered under sodium glows, basements hiding secrets until Prybar met wood once more, but pursuit closed gaps left by winter's veil. Detective Banks secured a warrant for Victor Klein's new Livernois salvage yard after the Prybar skin traces and van tread matches crossed judicial thresholds, leading a pre-dawn entry team through chain-link gates, sagging under snowmelt weight in early 1979 Detroit. The yard sprawled across 2 lots, cluttered with crushed Chrysler hulks and plywood pallets warped from damp winters. Floodlights, revealing a central shack where Klein slept amid ledgers and oil drums. Technicians combed methodically, unearthing a false-bottom toolbox beneath his workbench containing women's jewelry, prescription bottles matching 2 victims, pharmacies, and a coiled length of electrical cord stained with human serum proteins detectable via 1970s precipitin tests. Forensic yields escalated quickly, cord fibers aligning with ligature impressions across all 5 cases, serum excluding victims but typing to male blood group consistent with Klein's medical records from a prior bar fight. Jewelry included a locket from Ellen Pratt's 1975 inventory, clasp bent as if snapped forcibly, alongside earrings reported missing from Ruth Keller's apartment post-death. Banks cataloged each item against scene photos, building exhibit chains that projected unassailable links through typewritten affidavits stacking serology atop fiber continuity. The shack walls bore faint pencil marks outlining basement stair dimensions, measurements matching Delray and Corktown layouts sketched from memory or measurement. Klein surrendered without resistance at the gate, his coveralls dusted with fresh sawdust suggesting interrupted board cutting, eyes scanning the yard as officers inventoried his panel van's interior. Vacuumings yielded basement dust composites unique to victim blocks, paint flecks from Margaret Hale's stair rail embedded in floor mats alongside burlap threads tying back to window coverings. Banks oversaw transport to 10th Precinct holding cells, where Klein paced steel-barred confines under flickering fluorescence, his initial processing revealing scarred knuckles aligned with contusion patterns noted in autopsies. The task force expanded to 12 detectives rotating shifts, pooling precinct resources, strained by citywide budget cuts that idled patrol cars for lack of gas. They revisited all scenes with scrapers and vacuums, collecting overlooked baseboard scrapings that typed to Klein's yard soil via emerging neutron activation analysis, rare earth elements tracing directly to Livernois gravel pits. Canvases deepened in union halls and taverns, ex-day laborers recounting Klein's boasts about widow jobs, paying premium cash for minimal work, his van loaded oddly after certain calls with covered bundles dumped riverward under night cover. Victim linkages solidified further, Ellen Pratt's Hamtramck file reopening with ligature overlays matching the cord, her handyman alias confirmed via faded receipts Klein once pawned. A sixth potential case surfaced from southwest Detroit. 1974 basement death-ruled overdose. Victim posed with arms crossed. Boards pried loose pre-discovery. Klein's old yard address blocks away. Banks flagged it probable, though degradation limited retesting. The pattern now spanning 5 years through Detroit's deepening recession, where foreclosures multiplied basement vulnerabilities. Public strategy shifted post-arrest. Free press front pages detailing the basement strangler with composites and van descriptions. Tips flooding switchboards from across Wayne County. Women recalled Klein's visits, extending to unsolicited night checks on loose boards. His questions probing living alone amid mill-wife solitude. A former tenant identified him, casing her Poletown flat post repair. Flashlight through cracks revealing solitary evenings before she reinforced locks. Tips clustered around his scavenging routes, placing the van near 24 rooming houses with single female occupants. Klein's background emerged through dogged record pulls, juvenile trespasses in 1960s, Hamtramck escalating to 1970s, assaults dismissed for witness no-shows, always targeting widows and fixer-uppers he accessed via odd jobs. Ex-wife interviews from Pontiac detailed separations over his late returns, smelling of unfamiliar homes, rants against easy women, hoarding scrap value copper. Psychological consults labeled him organized control offender, staging falls to mask ritual strangulations, born of resentment toward isolated survivors in decaying habitats he navigated as trusted outsider. Surveillance tapes from corner payphones captured Klein calling victim complexes pre-arrest, impersonating landlords to gauge occupancy, behaviors prosecutors framed as premeditation in preliminary hearings. Bail denial cited flight risk and public safety, judges noting yard fires destroying partial logs days prior. Banks mapped Klein's cash peaks against union layoff waves, correlating with victim payments for board jobs logged vaguely as winter prep, timelines leaving no alibi windows during strangulations. Task force tensions rose over resource splits amid city arsons, yet Banks prioritized basement re-exams, uncovering pry bar gouges missed initially on window frames matching Klein's toolkit alloys. A break from Rouge River divers recovered burlap sacks weighted with pharmacy vials, labels linking to Clara Voss's renewals stolen pre-death. Internal doubters quieted as serology reports confirmed male proteins on cords and jewelry, probabilities excluding random acquisition in Detroit's scrap trade. As spring thawed alleys revealing tire ruts and discarded boards, prosecution built toward grand jury, stacking affidavits into feet-thick binders. Klein's isolation bred minor jail incidents. Shanks, fashioned from scrap confiscated before use, his composure cracking in lineup identifications by near victims. Banks walked Corktown stairs under rehabilitation scaffolds, noting how boarded windows once hid patterns now illuminated by pursuit, the net drawn taut around a man whose fix-it facade masked years of calculated descents into shadowed basements. The trial of Victor Klein commenced in Wayne County Circuit Court during Detroit's restless summer of 1979, when unemployment lines snaked past boarded storefronts and air thick with exhaust from idling patrol cars outside the aging downtown courthouse underscored the stakes of each high-profile case. Prosecutors unveiled a methodical case rooted in the salvage yard trove, projecting crime scene slides against wood-paneled walls where juries absorbed timelines, pinning Klein's van routes to basement discoveries across Corktown, Brightmoor, Delray, Hamtramck, and southwest Detroit. The false bottom toolbox took center stage, its electrical cord stretched taut under lights to match ligature casts, jewelry laid beside victim inventories, prescription vials aligned with pharmacy logs swiped pre-killings. Detective Banks testified over 2 days, his graph paper sketches enlarged to poster size illustrating drag paths defying natural falls, red lines tracing pry bar gouges from window frames to Klein's toolkit alloys confirmed via neutron activation. He detailed serology from cord serum typing to Klein's blood group, burlap fibers threading all scenes to Livernois yard sacking, paint chips embedding stair railings into van mats. Jurors followed his pointer across maps clustering service calls days before each strangulation, cash logs peaking oddly amid recessionary scarcity, alibi gaps sealed by pawnshop copper sales timed post-deaths. Pathologists paraded autopsies in sequence, overlays projecting identical neck fractures over ligature burns, contusions from posed tumbles rather than impacts, barbiturate variances explained by stolen vials matching Margaret Hale and Clara Voss. Forensic chemists explained precipitin positives on jewelry skin flakes, excluding coincidence in a scrap economy where such items rarely surfaced. Behavioral experts from Michigan State Psych Services framed Klein as classic organized offender, staging accidents to prolong impunity in foreclosed basements accessed through trusted handyman guys, resentment toward widows fueling ritual control. Defense mounted familiar counters, summoning scrapyard buddies attesting to Klein's harmless scavenging amid 1970s layoffs, dismissing toolbox relics as job site flotsam common in union halls. They hammered lab margins, serology probabilities falling shy of DNA-era certainties, fiber ubiquity in Detroit's auto waste, arguing against uniqueness. Tenant sightings got recast as mistaken identities in blackout-prone blocks, cash flows blamed on black market copper booms. Cross-examinations faltered under banks, redirects, geographic confluences placing Klein blocks away during windows, no alternate routes explained, near-victim lineups locking his features beyond doubt. Victim kin packed the gallery, their weathered faces mapping Milltown endurance as exhibits humanized the dead beyond case numbers. Margaret Hale's sister fingered the locket clasp under oath, recalling its engraving from a pre-widowhood gift, her composure cracking only on ligature details. Clara Voss's co-workers verified her solitary shifts ending at shuttered steel plants, underscoring how Board Repair Trust invited dissent. The Poletown tenant recounted Klein's flashlight probes through cracks, her reinforced locks thwarting what photos proved attempted entry, her recall syncing surveillance Polaroids to van decals. Deliberations spanned 3 days amid July heat waves, jurors reconciling no confession against pattern weight, where staging signatures overwhelmed isolated explanations. Klein sat stone-faced through readings of guilty on 5 first-degree murder counts, enhancements for serial nature, and premeditated vulnerability exploitation in decaying habitats. Sentencing hammered deliberation, judge citing societal fissures Klein preyed upon, widows isolated by economic collapse, their graves dug via pry bar and cord. Life terms stacked without parole sent him to Jackson State Prison, cell block isolation echoing basement shadows he once navigated freely. Post-trial probes tied Klein to the 1974 Southwest case, definitively via retested vial traces. Those statutes barred charges, the tally settling at 6, confirmed through prosecutorial reviews. Appeals crawled through 1980s courts, uniformly rejected as affidavits withstood motions, his pro se filings ranting against union widows dismissed as unhinged. Jackson logs noted his decline into solitary confinement, shank attempts quelled before escalation, death from untreated pneumonia in 1997 passing unmarked in parole board minutes. Detroit PD codified lessons into protocols, mandating cross-precinct logs for handyman complaints, basement safety audits in recession zones, tenant unions briefed on verification amid foreclosure surges. Banks advanced to lieutenant, his corkboard timelines reprinted in training manuals emphasizing pattern persistence over single-seam myopia, staging cues distinguishing ritual from mishap in strap squads. Corktown row houses rehabbed under urban renewal, Plywood swapped for security bars, blocks reclaiming vitality as factories yielded to lofts. Families erected plaques blending victim names with advocacy pushes, seeding neighborhood watches that patrolled alleys into 1980s recovery. Margaret, Ruth, Elsie, Clara, Ellen, and the sixth found voices beyond obituaries, their convergence with Klein cautioning against fixers lurking in economic ruins. Banks retired in 1995, his precinct map framed above a garage workbench, pins oxidized but lines indelible, reflecting how Motor City's hollowing amplified predators until vigilance rebuilt foundations. The series evolved from dismissed, falls into cornerstone case study, homicide classes, dissecting how recession masked seriality, pry bar scratches and crossed arms revealing truths winter boards concealed. Investigators decades on adapted its framework, spotting service role veils in urban flux, ensuring widows, basements lit brighter against encroaching dusk. Detroit reshaped through bankruptcies and rebirths, skylines rising anew, yet investigative stone bore scars reminding that decay bred hunters until pursuit hammered them down. Now, let's get into the next story for tonight. On the first Monday in October, the rain arrived with no wind behind it, a steady vertical fall that turned the red clay roads outside Pine Flats, Arkansas, into slick ribbons. The town sat low and wide along the Cache River, a place of soybean fields, catfish ponds, and trailer lots that bordered dark timber. People measured distance in minutes and seasons, not miles, and they measured trouble by how long it took to reach the diner. That morning, trouble arrived quietly in a bank lobby that smelled faintly of lemon polish and old carpet. Cache River Savings was not a big institution. It had two branches, one in Pine Flats and one in the county seat. It was where payroll checks became cash envelopes, where farmers refinanced equipment, where grandparents kept certificates of deposit in safe deposit boxes that still required a physical key. People trusted it in the way they trusted the river to flood in spring. It could be inconvenient, but it was part of the landscape. At 8:12 a.m., the branch manager, Nora Hollis, pulled into the parking lot and noticed the front doors were unlocked. The security lights were still on, even though the sky had already brightened. She went inside expecting a mistake, perhaps a teller who arrived early. Instead, she found the lobby untouched and the vault room door ajar in a way that made her stop moving. A vault door was not supposed to be ajar. It was supposed to be shut with a finality that made people feel safe. The vault was open. The inner cash cages had been cut. The safe deposit cabinet, a long wall of small drawers, stood with several compartments missing entirely. Someone had not simply pried them open. They had removed the drawers, as if harvesting them. There was no obvious chaos. The floor was clean. The fluorescent lights buzzed, as they always did. The absence of panic in the scene, the calmness of it, only sharpened what had happened. Within minutes, the county dispatcher sent deputies. The first to arrive was Deputy Miles Rook, who had worked enough property crimes to know that professionalism often looked like neatness. He kept his steps careful and his eyes working, taking in what was present and what had been spared. The lobby cameras were mounted high, a dome over the entry. Their indicator lights were dark. The DVR cabinet beneath the manager's desk hung open, empty. If there had been recordings, they had gone with whoever opened the vault. A local bank robbery usually left a narrative behind: a shattered glass door, a frantic teller, an abandoned car in the ditch. This one left a blank space. The people who did it had planned for time, not speed. They had chosen the hour when the town slept, and the bank's alarm company, based 2 states away, might treat a signal as a malfunction and begin its phone tree slowly. Nora Hollis stood in the lobby with her hands clasped tightly, looking as if she had been instructed to remain still. Her face showed the kind of distress that came with responsibility. It was not only the stolen cash, although that was significant. It was the safe deposit boxes, the private property the bank held in trust. Those drawers could contain jewelry, cash, documents, firearms, family letters, and the intangible sense of control people believed they had over their lives. By 9:30 a.m., the sheriff arrived, followed by an investigator from the state police, Special Agent Celia Wynn. She was not from Pine Flats. She had been raised in a larger town with a courthouse square and a movie theater, and she carried herself with a measured, organized focus that did not change when people spoke faster. She was known for being thorough without becoming theatrical, and she treated cases like systems that could be mapped. She walked through the bank in a nylon rain jacket, stopping at the vault threshold. The cut marks on the cages were clean, made by a tool with a consistent blade. She could see the faint dusting of metal filings in the corner, too deliberate to be accidental. Whoever worked here had cleaned, but they had not cleaned perfectly. That detail mattered. People who clean after a crime usually do it for one of two reasons: to avoid identification or to control the story. Both motives suggested forethought. The alarm panel had been opened. The wiring behind it was not a rat's nest of desperation. It was separated and labeled with small strips of tape, as if the person doing it expected to come back later. The vault's time lock log showed the door had been opened at 2:17 a.m. The bank did not operate at 2:17 a.m. The opening was either forced, or the system had been convinced that it was routine. Celia Wynn asked for the list of employees with access codes, then for the service records. Cash handling and alarm servicing created paperwork trails. The bank's internal culture, like most small institutions, leaned on familiarity. People knew who delivered office supplies and who serviced the copier. The bank manager knew the names of the technicians who had done work in the last year. That familiarity could become a vulnerability, a pattern criminals could exploit. Outside, the rain continued. Across the street, the diner windows showed silhouettes of people sitting in booths, craning their heads. In Pine Flats, a crime scene did not stay isolated for long. It became a communal event, even for those who did not want it to be. Rumors traveled faster than official statements. A stolen sum became larger with every retelling. Someone's safe deposit box became everyone's safe deposit box, a shared anxiety that made people inventory their own secrets. The first lead arrived through absence. The bank had no obvious forced entry. The back door showed no prying. The door frame was intact. The lock was unscuffed. That implied either a key, a code, or entry when the door was already unsecured. Nora Hollis, pressed to reconstruct her last evening, described locking up as she always did, checking the latch twice, setting the alarm with the keypad in the manager's office. Her certainty was not arrogance, it was ritual. People in routine-heavy jobs build their identity around doing the same thing correctly every time. Celia did not challenge the certainty. She noted it. People who are wrong about rituals are often wrong for understandable reasons. Memory smooths edges. The body performs steps automatically. If something interrupts the sequence, the mind fills it in later. That psychological comfort could be exploited by someone who understood the rhythm. Fingerprint technicians dusted the DVR cabinet. They found smudges, partials, nothing crisp. Gloves were likely. In the vault, one set of prints did appear, faint and incomplete, on the inside edge of the door where a person might brace themselves while leaning in. It was not enough for an immediate hit, but it was enough to suggest that not everyone involved was careful all the time. Even disciplined criminals slip when they are tired or confident. The safe deposit drawers were the next problem. The bank's records showed exactly which compartments were missing. There were 18 drawers removed from 3 separate columns. not clustered at the top where someone might grab quickly, but spaced, as if chosen. That detail changed the nature of the crime. It did not look like a general cash grab. It looked like selection. When Nora Hollis provided the names attached to those boxes, the list did not read like a random cross-section of town. Some were expected: local business owners, a retired pharmacist, a family with land. Others stood out. One was registered to a small LLC tied to a storage facility outside town. Another belonged to a man who lived in Little Rock and only visited the county for duck season. Another was in the name of a woman who had been dead for 6 years. Her account maintained in a way that could happen if someone kept paying the annual fee without drawing attention. Selection implied knowledge. It implied that someone had either seen the safe deposit roster or had gotten information from someone who had. It also implied that whatever was inside those drawers mattered more than the cash. Cash could be traced by serial numbers, but it could be spent. Safe deposit drawers could contain things people could not afford to lose, and things people could not afford to have found. By noon, the state police canvassed nearby businesses for exterior cameras. A hardware store 2 blocks down had a camera aimed at the intersection. The footage showed a dark van passing at 2:04 a.m., headlights off for a brief moment as it turned. The grainy image was not much, but it placed a vehicle in motion close to the bank within the time window. Another camera at a car wash caught a similar van an hour later, moving out of town toward the highway. The license plate was unreadable. The van had no obvious markings. The sheriff's office began fielding calls from safe deposit holders. People arrived in the rain with umbrellas and anger, clutching key rings and paper receipts. Each person's worry had its own weight. Some spoke of jewelry, others of cash, others of documents that could upend lives if exposed. The volume of fear became part of the investigation, not only because it created pressure, but because it suggested motives the criminals might have anticipated. Celia Wynn watched the crowd from inside the lobby. She studied their faces for flashes of recognition, the involuntary reactions that could reveal who already understood what was missing. Most were openly upset. A few were too controlled. Control in a crisis can mean resilience, but it can also mean preparation. Late in the afternoon, as the rain tapered into a damp mist, a bank teller named Grace Morrow mentioned something she had almost forgotten. 2 weeks earlier, a man had come in asking about safe deposit box sizes, speaking with a level of specificity most customers did not have. He had lingered near the hallway that led to the vault, looking at the door as if estimating it. He had not opened a box. He had left after collecting a brochure. Grace could not describe him in a way that would make a sketch artist comfortable. She remembered a baseball cap and a calm manner. She remembered him thanking her. The politeness stood out. People who are planning something often overperform normality, as if courtesy can camouflage intention. That evening, the first major decision was made. The state police requested assistance from a regional financial crimes unit, not because the cash loss demanded it, but because the safe deposit selection and the missing DVR suggested a sophistication the county did not often face. Pine Flats had handled burglaries and domestic violence, occasional drug arrests, and the periodic theft of farm equipment. This was different. This was a crime designed to leave Pine Flats with questions instead of answers. At 7:40 p.m., as investigators packed evidence bags and the bank's doors were finally sealed, Celia received a call from a trooper at the county line. A van matching the description had been found abandoned in a drainage cut near an access road. It had been wiped down inside. The plates were stolen. The vehicle identification number led to a salvage title from 2 years earlier. There were no tools left behind, no cash, no drawers. There was, however, a single object on the passenger side floorboard, half hidden under the seat rails. It was a laminated card, the kind that belonged on a lanyard, soaked at the edges from the wet. The print had run slightly, but a logo was still visible. It belonged to a private security contractor that serviced alarm systems across the region, including rural banks. Celia stared at the photograph the trooper texted her, and the case narrowed in a way that did not feel like relief. It felt like a corridor closing. If the card was real, the criminals had either used legitimate access, or they wanted investigators to think they had. Either way, the next step would not be in the fields or the woods. It would be in paperwork, schedules, and the human weakness that hides inside routine. In a town like Pine Flats, routine was a kind of faith. That night, someone had weaponized it, and no one yet knew whether the theft was about money, secrets, or leverage. The vault had been opened, but the real lock that mattered was still closed, and the key was somewhere in the ordinary details people stopped noticing years ago. By the next morning, the rain had moved east, leaving the town rinsed and sharpened. Pine Flats looked cleaner than it felt. The bank remained closed behind a strip of yellow tape that fluttered in a breeze that finally arrived too late to matter. Cars still slowed as they passed, as if the building might explain itself if watched long enough. Celia Wynn started where most rural investigations either found traction or stalled, in the paperwork that existed because people liked order. The bank's alarm system had been installed 8 years earlier. It had been serviced repeatedly, according to a binder of invoices kept in the manager's office, each one signed by an employee who confirmed the technician's visit. The contractor's name on the invoices matched the logo on the laminated card found in the abandoned van, a regional company called Delta Shield Security. The card might have been a deliberate plant, but it did not feel like a flourish. It felt like an artifact of work. Plants are usually too clean, too obvious, too confident. This card had been scuffed at the corners and bent slightly, as if carried daily. If it was staged, it had been staged by someone who knew how real things looked when they were used. She met with the sheriff and Miles Rook in a small conference room at the county office. On the table sat photographs from the vault, printed on a dot matrix-style office printer that made everything look older than it was. The images of the cut cages and missing drawers showed a crime that had happened without noise, and that quietness had become its own kind of pressure. People in town were beginning to interpret silence as complicity. Delta Shield Security's owner answered the state police call quickly, as if he had been waiting for it. His name was Lester Hart. He was in his early 60s, with a long history of contracts across small towns. He arrived at the office with a folder of his own, prepared to prove he ran a legitimate business. Celia noted that readiness. Innocent people could be eager to clear their name, but people with something to hide were also practiced at appearing helpful. The company records showed 4 technicians who serviced Cache River Savings in the past year. One was a veteran employee with a clean background and a reputation for being meticulous. Another had left 6 months earlier for a job in Memphis. The third was new, hired in the spring, still on probationary status. The fourth was a subcontractor who handled overflow calls and after-hours repairs. His name was Brandon Pike. Brandon Pike's personnel file was thin, mostly because subcontractors rarely generated the same documentation. He had provided a driver's license, a tax form, and an insurance certificate. The address listed was a rented house outside Jonesboro. He had no listed criminal record in Arkansas, but his employment history showed gaps. Gaps were not proof of anything. They were simply places where the story could be rewritten. Celia asked for Delta Shield's access logs. Modern alarm systems created digital traces, but only if the traces were not erased or overwritten. Delta Shield maintained a cloud portal for some accounts, and a local-only system for others. Cache River Savings was old enough that it had not been migrated. Its service data sat on an office computer in Lester Hart's back room, a machine that looked like it had never left the early 2000s. The service log showed the last maintenance visit had occurred 13 days before the robbery. The technician listed was Brandon Pike. The work order noted, quote, panel check, sensor calibration, time lock verification, followed by a signature that appeared to match the one on the invoice in the bank binder. That timing tightened the case into something sharp. 13 days was close enough for familiarity and far enough for memory to blur. A technician could have learned the layout, tested weak points, and returned with confidence. It also meant the town had been going about its life for nearly 2 weeks, with the bank's security potentially compromised, while no one knew. Celia drove to the bank and walked the perimeter with Miles Rook. In daylight, the building revealed small details. A rear alley ran behind the bank, bordered by a row of dumpsters and a service door that opened into a narrow hallway leading toward the vault corridor. The door had a keypad and a lock. The keypad cover showed slight wear, but no obvious tampering. The lock was a commercial-grade cylinder. If someone had a legitimate key, the door would leave no story behind. On the roof, above the vault area, there was a hatch for HVAC service. Celia climbed the maintenance ladder and inspected it. The hatch bolts were intact. The seal was unbroken. Entry from above would have been difficult, noisy, and unnecessary. The criminals had not wanted drama. They had wanted procedure. Inside, the bank staff were gathered in the break room, shaken and irritable, their faces showing the fatigue of being watched by their own neighbors. Celia asked about Brandon Pike, not accusing, only gathering. A few employees remembered him as quiet. Someone said he had asked for water and used the restroom. Someone else said he had lingered near the vault hallway longer than technicians usually did, but that could have been normal testing. The teller Grace Morrow mentioned the man who had asked about safe deposit box sizes, the one with the cap, and she wondered aloud if it could have been the same person. Her uncertainty was sincere, and it was also the kind of uncertainty that caused towns to start blaming strangers. Celia requested a list of every person who had been in the vault area in the last month. The bank had a log, more symbolic than secure, a clipboard where employees wrote down any vault entry for audit purposes. The handwriting varied. Some entries were careful, others were barely legible. People tended to treat logs as rituals until a ritual became evidence. The log showed routine cash transfers, safe deposit box appointments, and the service visit by Brandon Pike. It also showed a vault entry 3 days after Pike's maintenance call, listed as Manager Audit, signed by Nora Hollis. Nora insisted she did not recall any special audit beyond normal tasks. Celia examined the signature. It resembled Nora's, but it was slightly heavier, as if written with a different pen, or by someone imitating. This was not conclusive, but it introduced a more unsettling possibility. If someone had gotten inside the bank once, they might have returned again. That suggested either repeated access or someone on the inside. The missing safe deposit drawers became the next focal point. Celia requested the bank's annual fee payment records. Safe deposit boxes were paid by check, by cash, sometimes by a family member. If the criminals had targeted specific drawers, they might have been looking for something those accounts had in common. The pattern did not show wealth alone. Some box holders were comfortable, but not all. What emerged instead was a mesh of indirect connections. 3 boxes belonged to people connected to a trucking company that hauled grain and timber. 2 belonged to relatives of a county commissioner. 1 belonged to the Storage Facility LLC, which had been formed only 18 months earlier and had changed registered agents twice. Another belonged to the dead woman's account, maintained by a nephew who lived out of state and paid the fee by mail. Celia asked for the addresses used for those payments. One of them matched Brandon Pike's rental in Jonesboro. Not as a box holder, but as the return address on a mailed money order used to pay the annual fee for the dead woman's box. That discovery did not prove Pike had the box's contents. It did not prove he had even licked the envelope. It proved that his address had appeared in the bank's system connected to a safe deposit account that should have been dormant. It was the kind of detail that could be a coincidence or a careless fingerprint of intent. Celia leaned toward intent because coincidences rarely aligned with sophisticated crimes. Miles Rook drove to the storage facility outside town, a low, sprawling set of metal units with a gravel drive and a faded sign. The manager on duty provided records without resistance. Unit number 44, rented under the LLC name tied to one of the stolen drawers, had been paid in cash. The access gate log showed late-night entries. The surveillance cameras at the facility were decorative more than functional. The footage looped every 72 hours, and the most recent segment had been corrupted, apparently by a power surge. Celia walked Unit 44's corridor with a flashlight. The lock was new, shiny in a way that suggested replacement after attention. She obtained a warrant quickly. When the unit was opened, it was almost empty. There were 2 folding chairs, a thin layer of dust, and a faint chemical smell that clung to the concrete. The smell was consistent with cutting tools, solvents, and the kind of cleaning that did not happen in ordinary storage units. In one corner, taped beneath the lower lip of a shelving bracket, she found a paper strip with handwritten numbers. They looked like serial numbers at first glance, but the sequence was too short. She photographed it and bagged it. Her mind did not settle on a single interpretation. It was a fragment, and fragments were how this case communicated. The state lab ran the partial print from the vault door edge. The result came back the following day, and it was the kind of hit that always seemed to deepen rather than simplify. The print was a match to Brandon Pike. When Celia informed the sheriff, she kept her tone level. A fingerprint could have been left during the legitimate service call, but it had been found in a position that suggested bracing during entry rather than routine testing. The timing mattered too. If Pike had been the technician in the vault corridor, his prints should have been on the keypad cover, on the panel, on the door handle. They were not. The only meaningful print was inside the vault door, where technicians had no reason to lean unless they were inside. Celia requested Pike's phone records and location data. The warrant process moved quickly because the town's pressure had become an engine. People demanded action. Some demanded certainty. A few demanded someone to blame. As the paperwork progressed, another element entered the case, not through the bank, but through a quiet report from the county clerk's office. A clerk reviewing deed records noticed that the storage facility, LLC, had been listed in a property transfer involving a strip of land near the river. The land had no obvious value. It was swampy, prone to flooding, and inconvenient to reach. Yet it had been moved between entities in the last year with unusual frequency. Celia drove out to the river strip with Miles Rook as the afternoon light turned thin. The road ended in a track of gravel and mud, then in a clearing where reeds met water. The Cache River moved slowly here, dark and thick under cypress knees. A person could stand on the bank and feel watched by the trees. They walked the perimeter and found tire marks, recent, pressed into the wet ground. Near the waterline, under a tarp weighted with bricks, they found a portable generator and a stack of cut metal pieces that looked like the remains of safe deposit drawers, chopped and flattened, as if someone had tried to destroy them. The criminals had not just stolen, they had processed. Celia knelt, lifted one piece carefully, and saw a faint engraved number on the metal, a bank inventory marking. It meant at least some of the missing drawers had been brought here after the robbery. It meant the river strip was a work site, a place to open and discard. As she stood, she watched the water for a moment, not for drama, but because Rivers carried evidence away without caring about human plans. She could feel the case shifting again. The robbery was not only about taking valuables, it was about finding something in those drawers, something specific enough to justify this level of selection and cleanup. That evening, the phone location data arrived. Brandon Pike's device had been near Pine Flats at 1:58 a.m. on the night of the robbery. It had gone dark at 2:13 a.m., as if powered off, then reappeared on the highway heading toward Jonesboro at 3:51 a.m. Celia stared at the map trace in the sheriff's office, the line of movement through rural darkness. She did not celebrate the progress. In her experience, a case tightened around a suspect the way a rope tightened around a post, and the question was always what else the rope was attached to. Brandon Pike was not a local boy gone wrong. He was a subcontractor with access and gaps, and now he was a fingerprint inside the vault. That should have been enough to make the town exhale. Instead, it made the air feel thinner, because the selection of drawers, the river worksite, and the strange property transfers suggested a larger structure. Pike looked like a man who could open a door. He did not yet look like the reason someone would go through it, and somewhere in town people began to ask a different question. Not who stole from the bank, but what had been hidden in those boxes that was worth moving through a river marsh in the rain. The warrant for Brandon Pike's arrest was signed before sunrise, but the day moved faster than the paperwork. By mid-morning, news of his fingerprint and phone location had spread through Pine Flats with the speed of something half understood. The town did not yet know what he had taken, but it knew who to look at, and that knowledge carried a dangerous comfort. State police teams went to Pike's rental house outside Jonesboro first. The house sat at the end of a short cul-de-sac, beige siding, a lawn cut too short by someone who wanted no attention from neighbors. Inside, the rooms were nearly empty. A mattress lay on the floor of the bedroom, stripped. The kitchen cabinets held only a few cans and a single mug. There were no photographs, no personal clutter, no evidence of roots. The bathroom trash contained a pair of latex gloves and a receipt from a hardware store dated 3 weeks earlier, itemized for cutting wheels and solvent. The most telling absence was electronics. No computer, no spare phone. Pike had left as someone who expected not to return. That did not fit the profile of a lone opportunist who panicked after a crime. It fit someone following a plan to its next phase. Celia Wynn stood in the doorway and took in the space the way the air felt undisturbed. She had learned that people who lived lightly often did so for a reason. Sometimes it was poverty. Sometimes it was transience. Sometimes it was preparation. Pike's life looked like a staging area. The next stop was Delta Shield Security's office. Lester Hart cooperated again, but his confidence had shifted. The investigation had moved past polite inquiries and into the realm where businesses worried about their own survival. Celia reviewed subcontractor payment records. Pike had been paid in a way that stood out, not for the amount, but for the consistency. His invoices were always rounded, always just under thresholds that triggered extra review. He billed for after-hours work more than others. He had requested specific assignments, including Cache River savings, citing familiarity with rural installations. That pattern suggested intent, but intent alone did not explain the safe deposit selection. Celia returned to the question that had begun to dominate her thinking. What had been inside those boxes? The bank began contacting affected box holders individually. Some came in person, others called. Each conversation was documented. Some losses were mundane: a set of heirloom rings, a stack of cash meant for a land purchase, a notarized will. Painful, but not strategic. Then there were the others, One box holder, the nephew of the deceased woman, admitted after careful prompting that his aunt had kept ledgers, old handwritten books from her years, running a small trucking brokerage in the 1990s. The business had dissolved after an audit, but no charges had ever been filed. The ledgers were believed to contain records of cash payments and freight movements that did not align with official manifests. He had kept paying the safe deposit fee because he did not know what else to do with them. Another box holder, connected to the grain and timber trucking company, reported missing flash drives. He claimed they held only backup files, but he could not explain why backups were kept in a bank vault instead of a server. His discomfort was visible even without words. The truth sat close to the surface and refused to rise. The LLC, tied to the storage facility, produced no representative. The registered agent did not return calls. Corporate records showed the LLC had been used to purchase and sell small parcels of land near the river, always at values that made little sense. The parcels were adjacent to access points that locals used to load timber or grain onto barges at night, far from inspection. As Celia mapped these connections, a picture began to form that did not resemble a simple bank robbery. The safe deposit boxes appear to have held records, not valuables, records that could connect people and transactions across decades. The river strip where the drawers were destroyed was not just a convenient place to work, it was a symbolic one. The same river that moved grain and timber could move money, goods, and accountability out of sight. The crime scene by the river was processed thoroughly. Soil samples were taken. Tool marks were cataloged. One of the cut drawer remnants bore traces of ash, suggesting that some contents had been burned rather than removed. Burning documents outdoors in damp conditions was inefficient, but it was definitive. Someone had wanted destruction, not theft. Meanwhile, Pike remained unaccounted for. His phone had gone dark again after Jonesboro, then reappeared briefly 2 days later near a truck stop in Mississippi, before disappearing permanently. License plate readers along the highways had captured nothing conclusive. He had become a moving absence, defined by the spaces between data points. Celia requested assistance from a financial crimes analyst in Little Rock. Together, they began tracing the names associated with the stolen boxes backward through time. Patterns emerged slowly. A set of shell companies formed and dissolved. Land deals that coincided with regulatory changes. Trucking routes that avoided way stations. None of it was dramatic in isolation. Together, it suggested a long-running, informal network that moved goods and money through rural corridors, sustained by trust and silence rather than formal contracts. What unsettled Celia was not the existence of such a network. Rural economies often relied on informal arrangements to survive. What unsettled her was the timing. Why now? Why remove these records after so many years? What threat had caused someone to risk a high-profile crime in a town that did not forget? The answer began to surface through an unrelated investigation. Federal environmental regulators had recently begun reviewing illegal dumping along the Cache River watershed. The review focused on chemical runoff tied to timber treatment and grain storage. Subpoenas had been issued quietly to several companies connected to the trucking routes Celia had flagged. Those subpoenas were not public yet, but they were known in certain circles. Fear often moved faster than official notice. If records existed that could connect illegal dumping to specific operators and routes, they would be dangerous. Not just financially, but criminally. Destroying them before they could be seized would be rational, especially if they were stored somewhere presumed secure and private. Celia shared this working theory with the sheriff. It did not implicate a single mastermind. It suggested a collective motive. Pike, in this framework, was a technician hired not just for access, but for discretion. Someone who could enter a bank without raising alarms, literally and figuratively. The missing DVR now took on new meaning. It was not simply about avoiding identification. It was about erasing a record of who came and went, including anyone who might have been recognized by locals if footage surfaced. The crime had been designed to protect more than one person. Pressure mounted to arrest Pike in absentia, to name him publicly as the culprit. Celia resisted. Naming him alone would simplify the narrative in a way that felt false. It would allow others to retreat into the comfort of a single bad actor. The evidence pointed outward, not inward. Another search of the river strip revealed a detail missed the first time. Under a mat of leaves near the waterline, an investigator found a sealed plastic container. Inside were fragments of paper, soaked but legible in places. The fragments showed typed text, not handwriting, company letterhead, partial dates, enough to identify at least one firm that had been contacted by regulators weeks earlier. The fragments were consistent with hurried destruction. They were not ash, they were pulp. Someone had tried to dissolve them rather than burn them, perhaps to avoid smoke. The method suggested urgency and knowledge of what could be recovered. Celia felt the case narrow again, but not toward Pike. It narrowed toward a moment in time, a point when someone decided the risk of exposure outweighed the risk of action. That decision had likely been made in a room far from Pine Flats, by people who had not set foot in the bank but knew exactly what it contained. Late one evening, as Celia reviewed files in the sheriff's office, a call came in from a trooper in Louisiana. A man matching Pike's description had been found dead in a motel room near Shreveport. Apparent overdose. No signs of struggle, no wallet. The room had been paid for in cash. Celia listened without reaction. The news did not resolve anything. It removed a variable. Pike, if it was him, would not be explaining his role. He would not be confirming who hired him or what he had been promised. He would become another absence. The body identification would take time. Dental records were needed. But even before confirmation, Celia understood what his death would mean for the case. It would harden certain truths and leave others permanently soft. If Pike was gone, the investigation would have to move past him, toward the people who benefited from the destruction of records. That path would be slower, quieter, and less satisfying to a town that wanted an ending. Outside, Pine Flats settled into a false calm. The bank reopened with temporary security. People reclaimed what they could from undisturbed boxes. Others were told there was nothing to return. What had been taken was not only property, but certainty. The realization that the vault had held evidence of something larger began to circulate, and with it came a new kind of unease. The crime was no longer just about loss. It was about proximity, about how close ordinary lives had been to long-running arrangements that thrived on being unnoticed. Celia prepared for the final phase of the case, knowing that the truth, when it came, would not arrive cleanly. It would arrive as an explanation rather than a revelation, and it would implicate systems rather than individuals. The river continued to move past Pine Flats, carrying away fragments that would never be fully recovered, and somewhere between the bank vault and the marshy shoreline, the story of why the boxes had mattered waited to be assembled, piece by careful piece. The dental records confirmed the identity 2 days later. The man found in the Shreveport motel room was Brandon Pike. The cause of death was ruled an overdose involving prescription opioids and alcohol, no evidence of restraint or external trauma. His fingerprints matched those on file from Delta Shield Security. The case against him, as a suspect, closed at the same moment the larger case opened fully. Celia Wynn understood immediately what Pike's death would become. It would be treated as an endpoint by anyone who preferred the comfort of a single villain. It would also serve as a warning to anyone else who had considered speaking, whether Pike had intended to or not. In financial crimes, silence was often maintained not through explicit threats, but through the demonstration of consequences. The state police issued a carefully worded statement. Pike was identified as a primary suspect in the bank burglary. The investigation remained active. No further details were released. Pine Flats absorbed the news with a mixture of relief and dissatisfaction. The name had been given, the face had been fixed, but the unease remained, because the crime no longer felt finished. Behind the scenes, the investigation shifted jurisdictions. Federal environmental regulators, already building their case along the Cache River watershed, requested access to the materials recovered from the river strip. Celia coordinated the transfer, the fragments of dissolved documents, the bank inventory markings on the destroyed drawers, and the payment trails from the safe deposit boxes, all became part of a broader, evidentiary picture. That picture clarified quickly once agencies began sharing information without formal barriers. For years, a network of small trucking operators and shell companies had been moving untreated industrial waste, primarily chemical byproducts from timber processing and grain treatment, to unauthorized dumping sites along tributaries feeding the Cache River. The operations were low volume but persistent, spread across multiple counties and states. The profit margin came from avoiding disposal fees and regulatory oversight. The risk was mitigated through compartmentalization and trust built over decades. What made the scheme durable was its informality. No central ledger existed in digital form. Transactions were recorded in handwritten books, flash drives kept offline, and paper contracts stored privately. Those records were not meant to be used. They were meant to exist as leverage, a way to settle disputes internally or to ensure compliance within the network. Several of those records ended up in safe deposit boxes for a reason. Banks offered privacy, routine, and a sense of permanence. The boxes were accessed infrequently. Fees were paid quietly. The contents were assumed to be beyond curiosity. The federal subpoenas, issued weeks before the robbery, had targeted companies tangentially connected to the network. They did not name the dumping operation directly, but the people involved understood the direction of travel. Environmental investigations often began at the margins and moved inward. If regulators acquired even a fraction of the private records stored in Pine Flats, the informal network could be formalized in court, with names, dates, and routes aligned into something prosecutable. That realization triggered the decision. The records had to be destroyed before they could be seized. Removing them quietly over time was not an option. Subpoenas created clocks. The solution required access, speed, and deniability. Brandon Pike provided all three. He was not an architect of the scheme. He was recruited through a subcontracting chain that insulated the core participants. Pike's role was transactional. He was paid to identify which boxes contained records rather than valuables, using information provided to him indirectly through payment addresses, account maintenance patterns, and personal contacts who knew what had been stored where decades earlier. The selection of the 18 safe deposit drawers reflected that knowledge precisely. They were not adjacent. They were not random. Each contained records that overlapped just enough to map routes, payments, and dumping sites if assembled together. Destroying them eliminated corroboration. Individual documents held elsewhere would become fragments without context. Pike's maintenance visit allowed him to confirm access routes, alarm vulnerabilities, and vault timing. His later return, using either a copied key or a temporarily disabled alarm loop, was made possible by routine itself. The bank's security procedures were designed to detect force and haste. They were not designed to detect familiarity. The destruction site by the river was chosen because it sat at the intersection of past and present operations. It was near an access point used historically by the network. Processing the drawers there allowed immediate destruction of contents without transport risk, burning what could burn, dissolving what could not. discarding the metal in a place where scrap had no story. Pike's death, when viewed through this lens, no longer appeared incidental. Financial analysis of his accounts showed a final payment deposited days before the robbery, followed by several cash withdrawals. There was no evidence of blackmail or coercion directed at him, but there was also no evidence he had been prepared for what came after. Celia concluded that Pike had been paid for access and silence, but not for longevity. Once the records were destroyed, he became a liability. Whether his overdose was a result of despair, fear, or encouragement could not be proven. What could be proven was that his death benefited more than one person. Federal indictments followed within months, not announced in Pine Flats but in a courthouse, several counties away. They named executives, operators, and intermediaries tied to environmental crimes along the river system. The charges relied on whistleblower testimony, shipping records, and environmental sampling rather than the destroyed bank documents. The absence of the safe deposit records slowed the cases, complicated them, but did not stop them. In that sense, the robbery had failed. It had not erased the network. It had only reduced the clarity of its history. For Pine Flats, the case closed without ceremony. The bank upgraded its security and replaced the vault hardware. Safe deposit holders who lost items received partial compensation, though no amount covered what some had truly lost. The storage facility LLC was dissolved. The river strip changed hands again, its value inexplicable to anyone outside the investigation. Celia Wynn filed her final report with restraint. She named Pike as the individual who executed the burglary. She described the destruction of records as a coordinated effort intended to obstruct regulatory investigation. She noted that no evidence directly tied specific bank employees to the crime. She avoided speculation where proof ended. Before leaving town, she drove once more to the Cache River. The water level had dropped. The mudflats showed tracks of animals and people, overlapping, indistinct. She understood then why the crime had unsettled her from the beginning. It was not the precision or the risk. It was the way ordinary systems had been used to protect something corrosive for so long. The vault had not been breached to steal wealth. It had been breached to erase memory. In Pine Flats, life returned to its measured pace. The diner filled. The fields turned. The bank doors opened each morning on schedule. People spoke less about the robbery as time passed, though some still lowered their voices when they mentioned it. What remained was not fear, but awareness, the understanding that trust, when unexamined, could be leveraged, that routines, when observed closely enough, became instructions. The case did not change Pine Flats. It revealed it briefly to itself. Then it closed, quietly, the way it had begun.